It is Thursday, November 11th, 2021, and from the home studio in Middletown, Delaware, I am Marshall Manlove from Delaware Sports and My Sports Reports, and I have with me today from Delaware Sports Debate, Jon Buzby. Wasn't able to bring his partner Marty Sheehan here with him today. We'll talk to him at another time. But John's been talking about sports in Delaware for quite a long time. Jon, welcome to my show. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and hopefully there's no echo like the last time I did one of these videos. But let's first talk about you a little bit. Are you still the director of media relations for Special Olympics Delaware?
I am. I do that, and I also work with our Unified Champion Schools program, which brings kids with and without disabilities together to play on the same team and involved in a lot of inclusive activities throughout their schools. So I've been with Special Olympics now for 32 years. Started up with them right out of graduate school from the University of Delaware, and never left. And so it's been an exciting ride away for me to be part of sports in one of many different areas. And then, so, the other things I do, haven't been a sports writer, sports announcer, and now doing the podcast, and also with Wilmington University's live stream broadcast crew. It's been a fun 30 years for me. So it's, they say you should love your job, and I certainly do love what I do.
Well, you just answered all the questions in advance.
I'm happy to dive in a little bit further if you want.
All right.
I'm used to doing those stand-up news things where they tell you you've got 12 seconds to tell us about your event. Go. So.
Yeah, well, I think 12 seconds is long now. I think it's like 3 seconds. You got to get everything in now.
They end up taking 3. Yeah, they end up taking 3. It's about what it is. Yeah, you're right. So,
yes.
But yeah, so I mean, we do the podcast. We enjoy that. It actually started when COVID hit. Marty and I, we were the team for the Fox Sports 1290, originally 1290 The Ticket, high school football and basketball games. And then when we weaned away from that and clung on to Wilmington University, where we live streamed the men's and women's basketball games for the CACC network. And then when COVID hit, we had nothing to do because there wasn't, Wilmington University didn't play the entire year. And so we started the podcast, and we dabbled in it last year. And of course, the big topic last year was COVID and how it was impacting high school sports. And so we had something to debate every single week we did the podcast. And it was just one of those things that, whether it was masks or no masks, crowds or no crowds, that type of thing. A lot of controversy. DIA, God love them. They handled a lot of issues. They learned a lot going through it, as we all did. And so, we had the podcast, and it gave us a natural audience and something to talk about. And we had a lot of followers, and we kind of took the summer off. And then when we came back in the fall, we really decided, let's try to find our niche. And, there's a lot of good people, including yourself, doing good things. And there was nobody focused on football and just high school football here in the state of Delaware. And so we decided, and again, having broadcast high school football for, more than a decade, it was something that was of a lot of interest to us. And the only reason we stopped doing high school football was because it was on Friday nights. And quite frankly, my children are at an age where I need to be driving one of them somewhere while my wife drives the other one somewhere else. And so it was hard to justify sitting in a booth doing something I love for that reason. And so that's why we got out of it. But doing the podcast and doing the football part of it was a way that we felt we could really get back into it. And we did, and we've had success. And our listeners have, given us a lot of positive feedback. And I think they appreciate the fact that we try to cover the whole state. We're not just covering the top 5 teams. We're covering all 3 classes, the class system itself. And I know you want to touch on that that's a controversy in itself. And we covered a lot of that back in the spring. And so we've really tried to be the go-to people to know about what's going on in the high school football world. And it brings up the question, what do we do when the state championship game is over, or the games, all 4 of them, including the Special Olympic Unified game, and we have to move on to the next sport. And we've talked about it, and we're still trying to figure that out because we want the brand to stay. We still want to be the go-to for Delaware sports. The question is going to be, do we focus on boys basketball, or do we try to mix it up? Or do we focus on boys basketball and bring in experts to talk about the other things? And I say boys basketball because that's what Marty and I broadcast, for several years as well. So it's an interest we already have. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we do the Wilmington University games too. So we'll probably throw a mix of that in too. So we've just tried to, it's a hobby, like it is for you. None of us do this full time. We do it as a hobby. And so it's something we've really enjoyed doing. And as you and I were talking about before we started the show, it's become so easy. One of the great things about COVID, and it's hard to use the term great and COVID in the same sentence, I realize, but one of the great things is that we've learned a lot of things. We've learned that you don't have to travel as much for work, and you can accomplish the exact same amount in Zoom. In some instances, we've learned you don't even need to go into work. My son works for a company where they've decided they're going to work from home forever, or at least, for the next 10 years. And so those are some things that have come out on the plus side. And one of that is, for those of us in this business, is that we can do Zooms. And so when Marty and I get together and do the podcast, 5 years ago, you probably would have had to go into a studio and do it and figure that out. And that brings its own set of challenges and barriers. First of all, who's going to give you a studio to do it? And so the Zoom makes it very easy. He clicks on from home and I click on and we do the show, and we get the audio and the video from it, and we're able to post it. And, it's one of those things that I'm not sure we would have, well, I know we wouldn't have started COVID, because even though we have access to a studio because of our previous experience, with Fox Sports 1290, you weren't allowed to go into the studio. All the DJs are broadcasting from home. So this was just something, and I literally started in a closet. You can see I'm not in a closet anymore, but I started in a closet in my house, a walk-in closet. It was kind of a joke. And so, that's just the way we got started. And it's one of those things. Every Sunday morning we produce the show and we pop it up. And what's neat is we have people texting us, hey, did the show drop yet? We're waiting, if we're not exactly on time like we usually are the week before, type of thing. So that's become kind of cool too. And another audience that we've reached is the kids and the high school players. And so that was something that we wanted to do. And so we've tried to put in topics like top performances, so people check in and say, hey, was I a top performer, or was somebody from my school a top performer? And so that's just something that we've tried to market. You have to think those things through. What's going to draw your audience? And then you get the numbers back, and some weeks they're out of the world, and other weeks they're less, and you just kind of figure out. But as Marty and I always say, for those people who listen to podcasts, you don't always listen to them when they drop. And sometimes you don't even listen to them within 2 or 3 weeks of when they drop. And that's just the way it is. And that's just the reality. And some weeks you don't listen to them at all. I have 4 or 5 of my favorite podcasts, and sometimes I'll go 2 weeks and won't listen to any of them just because my schedule doesn't allow it, or I'm not in the car that amount of time or whatever. And so it's really been a fun ride, and it's something that we're going to continue, and we're just going to figure out what we're going to continue doing and what we're going to continue covering. And it might be just see as we go. To be honest with you, when we started back in September, the plan was not to do just high school football. It was to do more of a let's debate the hot topics in Delaware. And then what we realized was there's not a lot of hot topics in Delaware, at least in September. They get hotter as they go on, and the UD football team struggles. That's a hot topic, and this happens, and Stan Waterman leaves Sanford and goes to Del State. That's a hot topic. Those types of things. But we thought, okay, COVID's gone. We really don't have that much to talk about. The governor took care of that by mandating masks, and so it's very cut and dry. Even though the Appoquinimink School Board, had to argue with a couple members the other day, not to get off topic, about, hey, we're not going to vote for this referendum that's not going to cost us a dime just because you're making our kids wear masks. Well, they're not making the kids wear masks. The governor's making the kids wear masks, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but that's the reality of it. My son's going to play basketball this year indoors with a mask on, just like the volleyball players did, and that's just the reality of it until the governor changes that. And so, when we don't have that topic, then what are we going to debate? And then we got back into what we love doing, which is covering high school football. And we just cover it by a podcast. And what we've enjoyed more than anything, I think, about this is it's kind of forced us to cover the whole state. And so I may not know who every quarterback is in the state like I need to when I cover a game on Friday night, but I know which teams have good quarterbacks and which teams have good offenses and defenses and kickers and that kind of thing. And so that's been neat to do, because when you're a broadcaster, what you do is you focus on your game for the most part. You have a general sense of what's going on, so you can include that as part of the broadcast, but you focus on who the main players are, who are touching the ball, what they've done, what their stats are, how the team's done, and that. And whereas in a podcast, you're kind of forced to, okay, we got to have a good idea of what the whole stadium looks like. And by stadium, I mean the whole state of Delaware, all 3 classes. And one thing Marty and I love to do is research, and we love to prep. And we spend more time prepping, I guarantee you, than the average high school broadcaster or podcaster. And that's just because we love what we do. In fact, I've always said, my wife will say to me one time, how long do you think you'll do this? And I say, I'll do it until I don't enjoy the prep. Because when you don't enjoy the prep, the product is not what it should be. And so as soon as I stop enjoying the prep, that's going to be when it's going to be time to get out. I love doing the live stuff. I love doing the podcast. I love doing the CAC stuff for Wilmington University. That's all wonderful. But it's the prep that I can't wait to do. And so that's what makes it fun. So there's a long answer to what was going to be one of your questions, I think.
Answer to about 14 questions there. Yeah. No, you just saved me a lot of work. Right there with that answer.
That's what happens when you have a broadcaster on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the prep is work. I enjoy this part of it, the talking and all. I'm looking for like a research assistant, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's sports. I'm in it for fun, just like you are. So talk about your partner a little bit.
Sure. Marty's a great guy. We got hooked up when how the scenario worked is went back when 1290 the ticket when we were mid-season. My play-by-play guy at the time, I was a color analyst at the time, and that's all I had ever done. My play-by-play guy was a guy by the name of Matt Pensick, and he got offered the opportunity to be the sportscaster for WBOC on TV, which is something that was always a goal of his. It kind of fell into his lap, one of those best-case scenarios, perfect storms. And he picked up his family, moved to Milton, and he's now the anchor for the news for WRDE. So he's gone quite along in his career from that. But when that happened, and it happened again, it wasn't his fault. We were literally in the middle of football season, the high school football season, and I still remember he came up to me at the University of Delaware game. We were tailgating, or I was tailgating. He came over with his wife. He said, "Hey, I got some good and bad news, and hey, good news for me, bad news for us." And I was like, wow, what are we going to do? And so Scott Klatskin, who ran the high school stuff and was the head of that, he's of course the voice of the Blue Hens. He said to me, would you want to do play-by-play? And I had never considered doing play-by-play. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it was a lack of confidence or whatever. But it ended up being the best thing that could ever happen because I did do play-by-play, and I would never go back to color. I enjoyed the play-by-play so much. I enjoy controlling the broadcast, which is what you do as the play-by-play guy. You control the broadcast, you control the theme and the tempo and everything else. And so I really did enjoy that. I still enjoy do that. That's what I do with Wilmington University, and Marty's my color analyst. So anyway, Marty, we needed a color analyst, and Marty had dabbled with a couple different things. And, I think he was kind of working for the NFHS network. Sometimes they bring guys in to do it when they have the games and stuff like that. And so, it was one of those things where we had literally, I think we met one time in the William Penn press box because he was in the way and I needed to get by him to get to my spot to do the game. And he was there covering it for another organization, another media outlet. And so that, we didn't even realize we met then until we formally met. Marty had put his resume in or something. And so, and we just kind of took off, and it's been a great partnership. You have to get along with your broadcast partner because you spend a lot of time with them. I always joke I've spent more Friday nights with Marty than I have with my wife, and it's not far off. Because that's what you do. And we're a perfect we play off each other. He loves doing research as much as I do, so I always feel underprepared when I'm on the air with Marty because he's so over prepared. And so it's just such a fun thing when that happens. In fact, sometimes I'll sit back and I'll think, well, you know what? I'm gonna spend 20 minutes and research this, and I'll say, wait a minute, and I'll text Marty and I said, you've probably already done this, and sure enough, he usually has. And so that's a neat thing when you have that. I've worked with some color guys over the years, not consistently, but somebody like who would sub for somebody, who just show up, and hey, what teams are we doing again? That type of thing. And so that's hard. That is difficult. And so I'm blessed to have Marty as a color guy. We bang text messages back and forth all week long about stuff, and not only what we're doing on the podcast, but other things. He sent me a picture this morning. My son plays goalie for the Appoquinimink soccer team, and they had a big win last night, upset win over Charter of Wilmington. Even though it may have pointed out that the soccer people need to stop looking at records when they do their index and start looking at teams and what they actually do on the field. That's another topic we can talk about another time. But anyway, he sent me a picture of my son that was in the News Journal on Delaware Online this morning, and so so he follows him, and we're friends. We're very good friends, and that's important. And I think that comes across in the broadcast, or at least I hope it does. It comes across in the podcast, and it comes across on our broadcast, both on the radio and on the live stream that we do for Wilmington U. So, because that's what I feel. He's a friend, and he just happens to be my broadcast partner. But it was becoming my broadcast partner that created that friendships, and so he's a great guy. I would put him on a broadcast, and I've had people ask me to come do color for something, and I will tell them, look, you don't want me, you want my broadcast partner, to come on as a sub, as a fill-in, and that's how much I respect what he does, and he loves doing it, and he hates when he has to miss a broadcast for any reason, as do I, but that just makes it fun. So he's a great guy. I know he's looking forward to coming on your show later on during the playoffs and talking about it, because nobody knows more about the high school football scene than my partner, Marty Sheehan. And so that makes my job easy, both as a podcast host and when we do new basketball as the play-by-play guy.
Absolutely. So speaking of the state football tournament that's coming up, they've changed the format this year, and now we have, I guess, 17, 18 different state champions that we're going to crown this year. I know that you have a better opinion of it than I do here. Tell me what you think is good about the new alignment for the state tournament.
Yeah, I don't think my opinion is necessarily better. Opinions are what they are. They are opinions. One thing I don't like about high school sports here in Delaware, and I'm sure it happens everywhere, and I'll give you an example of what goes on in New Jersey, at least it did when I was there. In New Jersey, every sport, if you finished 500 or more by a certain point in the season, you got into the state tournament. And so you knew that, hey, if we're 5-5 in the sport of basketball by January 20th, we're going to get in the state tournament. We may not have a shot to win it, but we have a shot to be 500 and get in the state tournament. Here in Delaware, so many sports, and you can talk about them: girls volleyball, girls basketball, boys basketball, field hockey, football in certain years, where more than half the teams start their preseason knowing they have absolutely no shot to get in a state tournament because of the schedule that they're forced to play, because they're either, in the sport of girls volleyball, there is no divisions. Everybody's in the same pool. Same for boys basketball and girls basketball. Some of the other sports have changed. Soccer has changed, D1, D2. Field hockey has changed, D1, D2. But again, you've got the best field hockey team in the state, Delmar, plays in D2. That's not right, and that's not fair. Topic of conversation for another time. So at least with football, what they've tried to do is they've thrown out the window of how many kids go to your school to put you in a class. And instead, they put you in a class based on your recent history as a football program. Understanding that there's going to be some controversies. People were screaming that Howard should not be in Class 2, but should be moved up to Class 3 because they're two-time defending state champion. And what has Howard done? They've gone 5-4. Barely made the playoffs. If Mount Pleasant wins last week, they probably don't make the playoffs in Class 2. And so the committee got it right. And so what this class system has done, and especially in Class 3, you made the playoffs before you started practice back on August 15th, because everybody makes the playoffs this year. I'm not sure if that's going to stay that way. I don't have an opinion about that yet, other than I like that they did that because they weren't sure what to do otherwise. And so at least nobody can say, hey, they should have done it this way, and Appoquinimink would be in the playoffs instead of out, because they're right on the fence if they just took 6 teams. But instead they're in. Now, what could happen in this Class 3 system is you could have a lot of blowouts early on, but they've kind of eliminated that in the first round because the top 5 teams aren't going to play in the first round. They're going to get a bye. Same thing in Class 2. And so what I like about this new district thing is you've got a team, and I'm going to scroll down here. I've got the things up here. If you look at the Class 1 teams that are making the playoffs this year, St. Andrews haven't sniffed the playoffs in recent history. Tatnall, same thing, haven't sniffed the playoffs. Charter School of Wilmington, they were averaging about 1.5 wins a season when they were forced to play in Division One, the old Division One, because of how many kids go to their school. They're 5-4. They're in the playoffs. And what that does, Marshall, is it gives that school the opportunity to hope that good football players who want to go to Charter School of Wilmington because it's one of the top schools in the state aren't going to go somewhere else because they have no shot to have a winning program. I don't have it in front of me, but I know it's been years since Charter School of Wilmington has had a winning record, and they're 5-4. And so now that kid who was on the fence about, hey, I want to play football, but if I go to Charter School of Wilmington, I'm going to win 1.5 games a year for the next 4 years. Now it's a different story. And so that's what I like about this new class system. And I wish we would do it in other sports. And I think they've done it in a way where it's not watered down. The two best teams in the state of Delaware are Smyrna and Middletown, hands down. Every Class 3 coach would tell you that. What they have to make sure happens is that those two schools meet in the state championship game, or at least have the opportunity. Because what's happening in soccer is Appoquinimink upset win last night, and sure, I'm biased. My kid's a goalie for that team. We're going to play Sally's in the next round. I think us and Sally's could potentially be the two best teams in the state. I think Sally's is the best team in the state. And so, but because of the way the schedules worked out, Sally's played a powerhouse teams outside. Appoquinimink played a St. Albans team down in D.C. We played a nationally ranked Calvert Hall team, number 5, when we played them. That adds 2 more losses to your schedule, and that hurts you when the indexing comes out. So Sally's number 3 and Appoquinimink number 7. And so it just, that's where the index system works against you. And so what Class 3 has to be careful about is making sure that when this index system is done, because again, Middletown played St. Joe's Prep, Smyrna plays teams out of state, picked up a couple losses. And so they've got to make sure that just because the two best teams in the state challenged themselves to play out of state and didn't pick up wins in those instances, Middletown 6-1, Smyrna 7-2. One of Smyrna's losses, of course, is to Middletown. But if Middletown plays only Delaware teams, they're undefeated. If Smyrna plays only Delaware teams, they're undefeated. Other than the Middletown loss, they're still 1-2. And again, I don't do the indexing stuff. It's too complicated, and somebody else will figure that out. But that's what they have to worry about when you start, because you don't want to water it down. And it's going to be interesting to see how this works and to see what the responses are. I can tell you this, and I've harped about this ever since they put this out. Class 3 was set up with 11 teams. It's an ideal situation where the only people you play are the people in your class, because that would give you a 10-game schedule. Every team would have a bye, and they could just rank you like the NFL does in the AFC East. What's your schedule and what's your standings? And that would eliminate the issue I just talked about, because Middletown would be number 1 because they're undefeated in Delaware. Smyrna would be number 2 because their only loss is to Middletown. And the two of them would be the 1 and 2 seeds, up and down bracket, and they would win. They would meet in the state championship if they win to get to that point. So that's all you want. You don't want to hand them the state championship game, the two of them, but you want to have them the opportunity to not have to face each other in the semifinals. And that's what's happening with Appo and Sally's. And again, people might argue and might call in and say, how can you say Appo's number 7 in the state? That's their seed. How are they the second best team? And I'm not even necessarily saying they're the second best team. I just don't think they should have been put in the same bracket. But they were because of the index system, and the index system hurt Appo because they played 2 out-of-state teams and lost, and so they don't get those win points when it comes to index.
Yeah, that's going to be a good game between those two. Appo is the defending state champion, yep. And their final game of the season was against Delcastle, who they beat 4-0, and Sally's just beat them 2-1.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a good game. Can you call that really the state championship?
Well, I don't think you can go that
because
far.
It's the semifinal. They got to play one more game. But
yeah, and I don't want to disrespect Caesar Rodney. They're undefeated and with 1 tie. But what they'll tell you and what everybody says is, they don't play the same caliber of schedule that Appoquinimink and Salesianum played. And that's why, if Salesianum plays only Delaware teams, they're undefeated and they're the number 1 seed. Mm-hmm. But they don't. They play out of state teams to become better and play more powerful. And again, I'm not questioning anybody's schedule. As the old saying goes, you play the teams that are on your schedule. And, Caesar Rodney's not going to drive 4 hours to play a team up in North Jersey like Sally's did, And so we'll see. It'll play out, and we'll say what we'll say. And you know what? Caesar Rodney may end up winning the state championship, and I'll eat crow. But it's one of those things that, the index system is the objective way to do it, but it's not always the right way to do it. But
there's definitely no 100% proven way to get that all straightened out. And and all those are valid points. The problem I have with putting everybody into the state tournament, though, is that during the regular season, it takes away some of the excitement and importance of games. Like you had that Smyrna Sally's game recently that took on less of a meaning at this late time of the year because it didn't matter who won. Only as far as seedings are concerned later, but that brings a whole set of other questions into the equation. But now you have these two teams, and maybe in a regular setup where you had in the old tournament system, it would have been much more important in the 7th or 8th game of the season for one of them teams to win or not. Now it's like, no big deal. We're going to get in there. Caesar Rodney's going to get in there. They're winless. So what do we have to get up for today?
No, that's right. I mean, really, what the Class 3 teams are playing for is positioning. Mm-hmm. In slots 1 through 11, and hoping you get the bye. 1 through 5 will get the bye. But you're exactly right. That Smyrna Sally's game that you alluded to. Really, for Smyrna, they're in and they're going to get a bye. But for Sally's, they're on the fence as to whether, in fact, I haven't figured out the exact numbers, but some people are saying that if Appoquinimink beats Sally's on Friday night, Appoquinimic's going to have a bye at 6-4, and Sally's is not. And so while there is some meaning, it's certainly not the meaning that it used to be, that, hey, we got to win this or we're done after week 10. Nobody's done after week 10 in Class 3. And so that's going to be something. I think that's going to be the biggest decision. I think in these other classes, in Class 1, 2, they're going to fine tune some things, and they've got to be aware of, hey, what are we going to do in Class 2, which is the biggest of all the classes, when possibly one or two of the teams in District 3 who don't make the playoffs because they're not in the top 4, but that's the toughest district of Class 2. And so that 5th and 6th team in District 3 might be better than the 2, 3, and 4 teams in District 1 who get in because they won their district, and so I think they're going to have to tweak that and figure out how do we prevent that. And it might be that they just reduce it to, instead of the top 4 in each district getting to the playoffs, just the top 2 automatically go, and then they use the index system to get the bottom 6, so to speak. But in Class 3, it'll be interesting to see what they do. And I still go back to, the only reason I kind of like the open playoff this year is because, people were putting their schedules together because they had to before the football committee even decided what they were going to do. There was so much politics in that and so many steps that had to be taken. Regulations had to be approved by the DIAA board. And it was just a mess. Biden's having an easier time getting stuff through than that was. And so by the time they did it, a lot of their schedules were already set. St. George's and Sally's were the only ones who set their schedule to play every single person in Class 3. And so, to me, that's what you do. And then people will say, oh, yeah, but we've got a tradition, and we've always done this, and we've got to play this team and that team. And no, you don't. Change it. We have a class system for a reason. And in Class 3, because it works out, we're literally, with 11 teams, everybody can play everybody else to get your 10-game schedule. And then you don't even have to do indexing. You just have to have a head-to-head tiebreaker if there's 2 teams tied at the end of the season for that spot. And then you go back to 6 teams, I think, because you don't need teams 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 playing in the playoffs because they're going to get beat in the first round.
Right.
And so while it's great to have that playoff experience, the bottom line is you're really wasting a weekend of football with that. So go back to the 6 teams, but create a way to do it. And they've already created it. They just got to force people to do it so that you're playing that 10-game schedule. Everybody's playing the exact same teams. And you take the top 6, you guys are in the playoffs, have a good time. And so, again, it's not a perfect system. I think it's a better system. Half the people you talk to like the old way, half the people like the new way, and some people are up in the air with, let's see how it plays out. But
Yeah, it's a little tricky because you didn't know what was going to happen with
No.
the restrictions and whatnot. And have an open tournament when there was fewer games played, like last year, was fine.
Yeah.
I just think in general, if you go from 4 teams in a tournament to 12, it's overcompensated a little bit. And while one of the issues that I always had with a whole lot of teams in a girls tournament, for example, is this. I don't know how this is going to come off. I'm just going to say it. I don't really care. So if you put 48 teams in the girls volleyball championship tournament, for example, right? And regardless of how many teams you have in a bye, let's say you put in 12, you have teams that get crushed early on, right?
Basketball is the same thing.
And
Girls
when you
basketball is the same
see
way.
what happens emotionally to the kids after they get all pumped up because they just made the tournament, they have big pep rallies or whatever they do to get themselves ready, and they go out there and some teams get just humiliated, all right? And then you see kids crying. I'm like, oh, is this really what we wanted to accomplish here? And it's not like boys don't cry either. In football, you just might not see it because they have helmets on, but who needs to see that? And why? And we have a mercy rule during the regular season. And if we're going to have a football tournament where there's a good possibility they're going to employ a mercy rule, I don't know what that really does emotionally to kids. So I work I'm a hypnotherapist and a stage hypnotist, but at the hypnotherapy end of it, I deal with people who have emotional problems. And when you find out what the root causes of some of those things are, you look back and you always find it's something that happened in their childhood. And God forbid, 10 years from now, I find out, well, the reason that they're alcoholics now is because they got crushed in the Delaware State volleyball tournament. They got swept 25-2, 25-3, and 25-2, and it just ruined them and scarred them for life. That's just one of the issues that I see on the sidelines, and of course, a whole lot of speculation going on there, but it's horrible to watch. And especially when I was doing my television show and you do take video and you see the kids, they're all excited. They just won the state championship, and you pan over to the other kids that are just crying, and it's horrible to watch, right? We don't want to subject kids to that. It's not that it's going to happen you got the number 1 team and number 2 team. The same thing can happen there, right?
Right. Yeah,
but it's a different kind of emotion there, right? Than it is just from being humiliated.
Yeah, no, I don't think you need open tournaments in any of the sports. I like what New Jersey does. They take you if you've got over a 500 record, and there's some teams that play cupcake schedules probably to get the 500 record to get into the tournament, and they get blown out. But at least you're not putting an 0-10 team into the tournament or a 1-9 team into the tournament, both of which are going to happen. And, and again, that's the way it is this year. And you know what? I hope a couple of those teams pull upsets. That might be fun. But the bottom line is, in a normal year, and they did that because of COVID. And that way they didn't have to worry about what happens if the program shuts down for 3 weeks and only gets to play 7 games, which is still the minimum that you have to play to get in. I think it's 7 or 8. And they learned that lesson last year, and that's again something they learned. But I think when we get back to normal, I don't think it's going to make sense to have 11 teams representing Class 3 because when there's only 11 teams, I think you're going to have to go back to the 6, because the reality of it is number 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 do not have a shot to win the state championship. They may have a shot to pull a first round upset, but they're not going to win a state championship.
Right.
And all those coaches will tell you that. And it's the same thing in all the other sports in the state of Delaware. You do not need to have an open tournament. They do it. They did it because of COVID. I got it. Didn't mind it. But now let's get back to reality, and that you don't need an open tournament in any sport in any division.
The thing I get concerned about in football is you have the number 1 team playing the number 27 team in the tournament. You risk someone getting hurt, right? It's not, look, anybody can get hurt in any game, right? But you have this monstrous machine of a football team rolling over a team that, let's just say, is younger, inexperienced, smaller. In a physical contest like that, is can sometimes be painful to watch too.
Well, and a lot of these rosters are not the same numbers that they were when they started the season. You know, the early college education school has shut down their season. AI DuPont shut down their season. Dickinson shut down their season. I believe Dickinson did. I know they did. They did forfeit a game because of roster sizes. And so, because what happens, you know, with these rosters that start out small, kids get hurt, kids get sick, kids stop wanting to practice because their teams won one game all season. And so you get to a point where, you know, I heard somebody ask the other day if they asked me, do you think Cape Henlopen and Cesar Rodney will play a first round playoff game, or will they just will they forfeit it? Which is what will happen if they choose not to, and whoever they were going to play will automatically advance. And it's not because those kids that are there necessarily want to do that, or the coaches want to do that, but it's, you know, do they still have the numbers? And I don't know. Again, this was just an off-the-cuff question somebody asked me, but it is a realistic question. Is, you know, whether these teams that are basically forced to go into the playoffs. That's what it is in Class 3.
True too.
You're forced to play in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You know, at 0-10, you're forced to go play a playoff game or choose to forfeit. And so that'll be interesting to see. Whereas in the other classes, in Class 1 and 2, you know, those teams that are making the playoffs, by and large, all have winning records. And so in their mind, they got a shot. You know, there's a couple of people in each division you think are going to be the teams to beat. You know, in District 2, you got Woodbridge, which is undefeated. You got Archmere undefeated. You got DMA undefeated. And they play each other, DMA and Archmere, this week, so one of them will not be undefeated. But, you know, they're the front runners. But you got a team like St. Mark's in District 1. You got a team like Wilmington Friends, who's been in a couple state championships in the past few years. And you got a team like Caravel Academy in District 3. They're not thinking, hey, we're playing for second place. They're thinking we have a shot. You know, if we get one of these district winners in the state championship, we got as good a shot as anybody. And I do. So I think there's 6 teams at least. And I throw Howard in there. I picked them as my Cinderella team. We did that last week on the podcast. I wouldn't bet against Howard at any point in the playoffs. And so, you know, you got 7 teams that I think legitimately could win a state championship in District 2. You know, you got the 2, Middletown and Smyrna, that are in Class 3. And, you know, when you look at District 1, the teams that won, St. Elizabeth undefeated, Laurel undefeated, they're obviously the front runners, but Indian River took Laurel to overtime. And if it wasn't for a blocked extra point, they might have beat them. So you got them. Tatnall having their best season in a long time. It's 6-3. So there's no gimmies there either. In fact, I think it's going to be more fun, Marshall, to watch and follow the Class 1 and Class 2 playoff runs until they get to the state championship. And then obviously it's going to be fun too, where I think if Middletown's number 1 and Smyrna's number 2 in the seeding process, I think everybody's going to think, all right, we just got to get to the point where we get to the state championship. And then what a great game that's going to be, you know, because if they remember, Middletown won 28-14, but that game was tied 14-14 going into the fourth quarter of that game and it was at the beginning of the season. So both those teams are better than they were then. But they're probably, I guarantee you know, if those teams played 2 out of 3, they'd probably go 1-1 and then have to play the best of 3 thing there. That's how close they're going to be. So that's going to be fun. But so I think the run in Class 1 and Class 2 to get to the state championship game is going to be fun to follow. And again, I think that's where this is fun, because you've got an opportunity to see these teams, St. Andrews, Charter School of Wilmington, St. Elizabeth. Those guys have not been in the playoffs in recent years, at least consistently. Same thing with Seaford. Been a while since Seaford's had a winning record, more than 2 or 3 wins, and here they are at 6-2. Odessa High School, a brand new high school, playing with just freshmen and sophomores. 3-6 record overall, but 3-3 in the district, so they get in the playoffs, so they get a shot. So again, it just makes it more fun for the schools, and I think we got to, it's a toss-up. The Class 1 and Class 2 are toss-ups, and I think Class 3 is a toss-up once you get to the state championship game. But that's what makes this new system fun, at least in my opinion. Yes, tweaks to be made. Got to figure out some other things. You know, they almost got caught with, they say the best record in each district that determines your placement. Well, is your best record most wins in your district, or is your best record the percentage? And they had a case where because of COVID, they wouldn't count that as a forfeit. And they do need to change that. And Marty brought this up, that going forward, You don't want to punish the team that has COVID, because then you don't want to start people, lying about whether they've got it or not.
Right.
But the team that doesn't get to play because the other team has COVID issues should still get a win, so they don't get punished. And that almost happened to Mount Pleasant. It ended up it wasn't going to be an issue because Friends beat them, and that put Howard in purely. But that is something I talked to Jim Comedies about, and he said, no, that's something we got to get put in writing. What defines the best record? Is it the number of wins, or is it the percentage? Typically in most sports, it's the percentage, and he felt that's where they were going to lean. But he said, to be honest with you, John, we did not put that in writing. So that's something the committee would have to decide at the meeting. So imagine that controversy coming out. So I'm glad for Jim. Those guys have dealt with enough stuff, and they've done a great job. I'm glad for them that controversy didn't happen. But it's an example of a tweak they've got to figure out moving forward. But again, I like this 3-class system. Got its faults, but a lot of pluses, I think. And one of the biggest pluses is we're seeing teams. I figured out that there are going to be 17 more teams playing in the playoffs this year than there have been since they invented the Division I and Division II system back in whenever that was, the 70s or the 80s. So 17 more teams get to play a week 11. And I think that's pretty cool, at least now. And so I'll have another opinion maybe in 3 or 4 weeks. And it might still be, I think it's a great system. Or it might be, you know what, yeah, we really got to look at this. The blowouts are just as many and blah, blah, blah. But we'll see. That's the fun part about it. We're going to get to see, and we're going to get to follow it along.
Yep. Those are all good, valid points. Well, John, I think we're like 40 minutes deep, which means that about 39 minutes weren't seen by the average viewer. The average viewer. But tell people where they can find your show, Delaware Sports Debate.
We're on wherever they listen to their podcasts. Delaware Sports Debate, iTunes, Spotify. We're on iHeart, all the normal ones. But then we also have a YouTube page. We call it Best of Delaware Sports Debate, and that is where they can go in and they can see our best clips. We clip them out, and so you don't have to listen to the podcast typically is an hour long. But we clip out the best parts, whether it's the top performances. We have a segment called Random Thoughts, which we enjoy because it's just thoughts around the sports world that Marty and I have. Sometimes we debate them, and sometimes we just lay them out and give our opinion. But that's been a popular piece that we clip out every week, and it's not just about Delaware high school sports. It can be about anything. So it's that kind of stuff that we put on our YouTube page, which is Best of Delaware Sports Debate. But again, the podcast usually drops on Sunday late in the morning. We are going to do a couple specials as we lead up into football season. This Sunday, we are not going to drop the podcast till later in the day once the teams are announced. And then on Wednesday or Thursday, we'll drop a podcast with what we're going to call an in-depth analysis of who we think is going to do what. And so it's going to be fun for us. Again, we all do this because we enjoy it, not for the money. And so it's something that we're really looking forward to. It's hard to believe we're at the end of the Delaware high school football season.
Yeah. Well, Jon Buzby, I want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope we'll get to speak together again, and hopefully I'll get to meet Marty here soon, too. Anytime you have an open invitation, you want to just talk about sports, whatever they might be, just hit me up, and we'll do so and have some fun doing it.
Sounds great. I enjoyed it. Appreciate you having me on, and look forward to being on again. I know Marty's looking forward to being on too.
All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, hang there for a second while I say goodbye. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that was Jon Buzby from Delaware Sports Debate. I am Marshall Manlove from Delaware Sports and My Sports Reports, and now from the home studios in Middletown, Delaware.